that there is a global race, and for you to actually have your rightful place within that global race, you have to also be tooled for it. And for you to be tooled for it, you will have to enable your women, and for your women to be part and parcel of your economy, of your drive forward. And I think this is one of the remarkable success stories of the UAE. I mean, people ask many times, you know, what is, if you had to pick one thing as your most successful legacy as a young country? And I'll say it's the enablement of women. Forget everything else. That is the one single thing that is the most important thing that we've done. And remember, I mean, the UAE is a conservative society, but I think it had a forward-thinking leader in Sheikh Zayed, and he understood early on, even without the formal education that he did not really have, he understood very early on that you can't really build society, you can't really talk about tolerance and build a modern society and create opportunity and not take that position on enabling of women. And I think this is, in my opinion, our big number one success, to be honest, from our perspective, and we are very, very encouraged about it. So the stale arguments of extremism against women, whether they are from Dhaka to Dewsbury, they don't really stand. You know, that is not an argument, and I think this is what we have also seen in Saudi Arabia. A taboo or taboos have been broken, and society has been supportive also of this policy. We need also peace in the region. We need peace in the Middle East, and we will have to reach agreement at the national level. I'm here, for example, speaking about the Arab-Israeli issue, for example. Essential that we resolve this issue. There is a lot of good work that has been done over many, many years, an accumulation of good work. And I think it is essential. I certainly believe that the Arab peace plan, although it's quite strategic in its view and needs details perhaps, but it is really the right way forward. And currently, and I'm sure some of the questions will address some of the details that I have not actually, elaborated here. We'll talk about it. But I think this is also an essential part in building what we are seeing in the Middle East. The UAE will support a peace narrative, and the UAE will continue to help, and I think we are currently continuing to help. We have recently, for example, pledged to UNRWA $50 million. We continue to help in Gaza. We continue to help many of the UN efforts. And we continue to help a lot of the current, what I would call, living standard developments. But we do really need a political plan. We are concerned about the future of a two-state solution, and we need to look beyond and see what the Americans will actually present vis-a-vis this issue. The UAE, we recently opened the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and it's a magnificent, magnificent museum, a world museum right in the center of our country. And if you look, one of the things that I did a pre-tour to look at the museum, and I noticed, because the museum actually charts the development of humanity. So it takes it, and in a sort of comparable way. And I looked, and there was basically one of the displays that actually had several of the religions displayed there: Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, etc. And then I asked later on, did we have many objections on that? And I heard, no, none at all, one or two, none at all. And, for us, to reach that point in a very conservative Muslim society and to show people that tolerance is the way forward. It's not exclusiveness. The acceptance of the others is the way that you can actually build a healthy society and is the way for you also to compete internationally, because you can't come and sort of hide behind exclusiveness, hide behind, no, that really doesn't doesn't cover me, because in many ways, my historical development is different, etc. No, there are things that are universal, and I encourage you very much to visit this museum. It is really a self-confident country, comfortable in our own skin and what we can produce. And I think the Louvre shows also clearly that the West is a partner. It's not a foe. And I think this is essential. I think it is essential as we look at the West that we look at the West as a partner. We can't go digging too much into this whole sort of colonialism, issue and so on and so forth. I think we need to look more towards the future, because otherwise this is another reason why we are explaining our failure to compete. Education systems across the region also need to learn from the Louvre. They must foster innovation, cross-cultural exchanges, and I think these are things that we have done also in the UAE. It's still, work in progress, to be honest. But we've looked, we will not allow our education system to be a bastion of extremism. And I think this is something that we have actually been fighting against for the last 20, 25 years. And we clearly came and said, simple thing. I mean, if you go to a dentist, you always will ask somebody who's gone to that dentist before and said, how good is he? Is it, can I trust my teeth with him, and so on and so forth. But many times you are not going to use the same scrutiny to ask about who's teaching your kids, whether it's in a Quranic school or whether it is in a primary school or this. And in the UAE, we have made it a point to ask, because if we're concerned about our teeth, we should be more concerned about our kids. And I think this is the sort of narrative that we are pushing forward. The narrative that we need to be part of this world, we need to compete, we need to score, we need to understand that only within what's going on universally we can succeed. Otherwise, we are really creating what I would call, our own mental blocks that extremists are pushing for. Political Islamism is different than Islam. Political Islamism, by contrast, wants to divide people of different religions and abolish distinctions between countries in hopes of creating a pan-Islamic theocracy. And if you really listen to political Islam, the problem is you start thinking about Shia and Sunni, and then you start thinking about Salafi and non-Salafi, and then you start thinking about women in a secondary role, and then you start thinking about the Muslims and non-Muslims, and so on and so forth. There is no end to this sort of segregated thinking. And I think this is why we need to differentiate between Islam and between political Islam using religion for what is essentially a distorted political view of our region. And I think this is a major issue that we need to address. Pernicious ideologies like that must be dealt with robustly. We've passed many, many laws over the years to control that. We have made sure that mosques are not pulpits for hate. We have made sure that schools don't create an extremist generation. We have made sure that Quranic schools are not a cover for distorted views to sort of mobilize young kids in their summer vacation. We've taken a lot of these steps, and beyond that, we have made sure also that the network that finances many of the extremist ideologies is something that is in check. So rarely you will see a story that a certain extremist organization was financed by money coming from the UAE, etc. It's the effort of about 25 years of work. It's not the effort of a quick decision. This is 25 years of work, of understanding that catching up with the world will require that we have a totally different narrative. We also need to confront extremists abroad. Part and parcel of our thinking is realizing that the international system has changed, that you can no longer be dependent on, let's say, an American intervention of the sort that liberated Kuwait. It's no longer something that you should consider as part of your game plan. Of course, you do need your friends. You do need the friendship of the United States and of the UK and of France and others. But if you are not able to carry some of the burden yourself, then you're not understanding the nature of the international system. And I think this is something that we have come up with, we've realized several years ago. So we've played a role in Afghanistan. We have had troops in Afghanistan for 11 years. We've had 20,000 Emirati soldiers who have actually served in Afghanistan through groups. And we've done it why? We've done it for two reasons. I think number one is to emphasize that this is not a war of civilization. This is not a crusader war. And that was essential to come and say Bin Laden and other extremists do not represent Muslims. And as a result, we were the first Islamic country to be actually on the ground in Afghanistan. And our young boys have actually seen combat there. And as I said, 20,000 of our military has served in Afghanistan. We've done that in other areas, in Al-Shabaab and against Al-Shabaab in Somalia, where we also played a role, and we were one of the early really warning sirens against piracy in the Horn of Africa, and played a major role here. Why do we do this? We do this, as I said, for two reasons. Number one, realizing that with this changing international system, you have to bring something to the table. You can't just write a check and subcontract your regional security and your regional safety, etc. You have to be seen that you are also a major part of what's going on to secure that stability. The other reason also is if we allow only Western countries to fight against Al-Qaeda and others, we're really saying that the other party, which is Al-Qaeda, is really a representative of the Muslim view. And I think that this is something that we reject totally, and this is why we have been in these various areas. Again, and I'm sure I'm going to hear some questions on Yemen also. Again, the whole Yemeni war again, this is an issue where we could see it right in front of us. This is a Hezbollah in the making. Shall we really do what everybody else did in the 80s, duck and then wait for this Hezbollah to crystallize and become a force and undermine our stability in a vital corner of our region? And we understood also that this is something that we have to take as a burden. And I think this is something that we have taken on, and I know that there are very strong and different views on it, and I'm willing to fight my corner when the question also comes on that. So in Yemen also, we are looking at it as an opportunity to decimate Al-Qaeda. You have to remember, before Daesh, AQAP was basically the main terrorist organization in the world. And today we have also that opportunity to address that issue. Again, I'm not going to try and cover everything because I'll leave some to the questions. But again, I want to say something about Iran. I think this is very significant currently. We do really, we are rational people. We would like a rational neighbor next to us. We want a neighbor to trade with. We want a neighbor who we don't interfere in their internal politics and who doesn't interfere in our internal politics. But the current government in Iran has actually been very aggressive in its approach towards the Arab world. It has been involved in every single conflict in east of Suez, whether it is in Syria or in Iraq or in Yemen or in Bahrain or in other areas. And clearly, today we have a problem because the Iranian also government has been much more aggressive post JCPOA. So clearly post JCPOA, what we have seen is an Iranian government that is willing to spend $5 billion every year in Syria and more, to put in thousands of recruits into Syria to try and influence Iraqi politics, to try exporting missiles which it claims is a defensive program to the Houthis, and targeting places like the airport in Riyadh and threatening to target our cities in the UAE. I think you can't come and take a quietist view towards all this, because if you do, you are actually allowing Iran, in this case, to build another Hezbollah in the south of the Arabian Peninsula and to really have a permanent threat. So clearly, do you take a difficult decision now, or you leave it to an impossible decision later? And I think our choice was to take a difficult decision now. As we move forward, we do really hope that the current American effort to bring about a change in Iranian approach is successful. We are worried a little bit about what is seen as a divergence of views between Europe and the United States over Iran. We believe that what links Europe and the United States far outweighs everything else. And for us to see actually a West united on this or that position, for us that is in itself a cornerstone of the international scene. So clearly, the idea that the Iranian government is counting on or some sort of European lifeline, which will not, I think it really is a fallacy. But the problem is, why encourage that fallacy while we can address the issues right now? I'm sure you want to hear a little bit also about the Qatar crisis. And I don't want to really say much because not much has changed really, despite all the hype and all the news and the purported, it's a sort of a lot of motion, but you're standing still. Because fundamentally, we want two things from Qatar really: for Qatar to be accepted as part of its natural environment, and fundamentally all the other issues are ruse because Qatar needs to address these two issues. One of them is Qatar's generous support for extremism and jihadism, and in some cases, as we have seen in many instances, some of the terrorist organizations, such as al-Nusra and others. And the other thing is, we would like also Qatar to stop financing or attempting financing the attempt of destabilizing countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Bahrain and others. These are fundamentally the two things that count. Everything else is basically, is basically subplots. The main plot is really Qatar agreeing to do these things. It's not about the independence of a small state. Kuwait is a small state in the Gulf. Oman is a small state in the Gulf. The UAE is a small state in the Gulf. Bahrain is a small state in the Gulf. And we all have our independent policies. And we don't really have a problem with the independence of the policies of these states. But I think the plot, as I mentioned, is these two things. Stop supporting extremism, jihadism, and terrorism, and stop financing and trying to undermine Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Bahrain. I think these are the two fundamental things. Until that changes, I think everything else is money else spent to try and create some subplots, and I don't think they are going to be anywhere. This is basically what I have to say. I just wanted to give an overall framework of how we see things. I'm sure that in the questions we will get a little bit more detailed questions, which will also allow me to try and address these and hopefully convince us. Thank you.
Yeah. Very good. I'm sure there'll be many questions. I see just trying to get a sense of the scope of hands. Yes. Gentleman in front, name and organisation.
Michael Howard, the House of Lords. Thank you, Minister, for your very interesting speech. You described the kind of Iran that you want to see. But my question is, how are you going to achieve it? Do you think there is any realistic prospect of regime change in Iran? Do you think there is any realistic prospect, without regime change, of persuading Iran to change its policies? How do you think you're going to achieve the kind of Iran which you described in your speech?
Well, again, this is nothing about regime change. I mean, Iran is, a major country in the Gulf, and the choice of a government that Iran has is up to the Iranians, really. But, and I think also, I have no views on how they want to run their economy. If they want to run it in the same disastrous way that they've been doing it, that's up to them. But, for me, what is important is Iran's role in destabilizing the Arab world. And I think what I would like to see, basically, is for Iran to realize that the cost of destabilizing the Arab world is high and has repercussions also on its own internal politics. So I would like to see several things, for example. I would like an international monitoring system that will ensure that Iranian missiles are not a threat to us. Not the UAE, but the region, I would say. I would like to see, for example, policy arrangements where Iranian soldiers and officers are not fighting in the thousands in Syria and other areas. I would like also to see where Iran's proxies, such as Hezbollah, are more political and part and parcel of the Lebanese political order and are not holding that political order with a gun to its head. So what concerns me more, whether Iran will become a normal, rational player is something that I'm hopeful of at some day. But currently, what really concerns me is Iran's nefarious activity in my, sort of Arab space. And I think this is what I would like to address, whether it's in Yemen or in Syria and others. And I think some of these developments can be done. And I am very worried also about Iran's nuclear program, because a country that lies about its missile developments that they've never exported, they've never sent it, and every single team that have checked Houthi missiles have found out that they are Iranian origin. Why would I believe them on their nuclear intentions? I think again, the worry is when you have that sort of capability, but you marry that capability with action and rhetoric. If you have a capability, but the action and rhetoric is comforting, maybe then you have no reason to be worried. But when you have that capability and then you see the action and you hear the rhetoric, I think you're very concerned. So clearly, the sort of regime that the Iranians want is their affair. But what I would like to do as the UAE, as the region, and I think many other Arab countries, is to impress on Iran that the Arab world is not an open field where you can just come in and decide which government rules and how many militias you're sending and you have a roaming general, moving from Syria to Iraq to here and there. I think this is the sort of the view that we would like to see.
Loads of questions. Lady in the aisle there, if you just wait till the microphone comes, name and organisation, please.
Hello, Lauren McKevitt from Morgan Consulting. I specialise in East and Horn of Africa security. Yes. The UAE has recently invested a huge amount in taking control of the port of Berbera in Somaliland, which adds to an investment race in the Horn of Africa region and sees Saudi Arabia and the UAE on one side, Qatar and Turkey on the other, and China involved with just about everybody. Observers in the region are concerned that increased militarization in the Horn could see conflict in Yemen spill across the water to an already fragile region. And the Berbera investment has caused a substantial breakdown in UAE-Mogadishu relations this year. I wondered if you would comment on the future of UAE's involvement in counter-extremism work in Somalia in an era where the breakdown in government-to-government relations is a principal concern.
Okay. Good question, and I think just to sort of organize my thoughts, I want to break it into three parts. First of all, a large part of the success of the UAE is about logistics. So our interest in ports is basically driven by our national experience. One of our big successes is really being able to be a logistics center for the region. I'll give you an example. We had recently the Chinese president visit the UAE, and I was also surprised at the number. We are actually China's second largest trading partner globally. The UAE is China's second largest trading partner globally. So it just tells you a little bit that our interest in free zones, in airports, airlines, storages, offshore facilities, ports, is a large part of why we are interested in ports. So clearly, when Djibouti reneged on a 50-year concession to the UAE, we have a huge market in Ethiopia and other areas for us to service as the UAE. So DP World, which is publicly held company, started on the Berbera port. Now, on the Berbera port project. Now, the Berbera port project was already something that we had discussed with successive Somali governments. But the current Somali government has actually taken a different and dim view over what we are doing there for several reasons. One reason is that there is a clear, policy approach that the center wants to exercise more influence over the regions, and I think this is one of the things. And the other thing is clearly there are, within the region, there is a rivalry, and there are basically three axes. There's an Arab axis led by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and we are part of it. There's an Iranian axis, and then there is what I call a political Islam, Turkish, Qatari axis. And you're seeing that sort of, it's a simplification, but it explains the thing. So as a result, there are attempts currently to mediate between us and Somalia. And we don't have a problem because all the work, we were in Somalia when nobody was there. When things were dim and difficult, etc. And they're still difficult, but they're nowhere to where we were. And we played a role against Al-Shabaab. We played a role in training the Somali military. We played a role in trying to stabilize, etc. So we'd like to continue to do our work. But we have made it very clear that we have been wronged with regards to how we were treated with the shipment of $9-point-something million that was going to many of these recruits. And we are asking for an apology for that. And I think that that apology itself is something that we are currently working on. And if the Somali government realizes the positive nature of what the UAE can do, I think this is very positive. Now, another development that's very important in the Horn of Africa is the historical rapprochement between Addis Ababa and Asmara. And this is a role that, again, I don't want to exaggerate the UAE's role, but we're very proud that we played a role in that sort of rapprochement. But I think the success of the rapprochement basically comes because both parties realize that this is time to heal the rift. This is time to move on. And from here I'm saying we do really need the international community to support that rapprochement, because in a way it will actually, the Horn of Africa is another problematic area. When we talk about the Middle East being a problematic area, the Horn is a very close competitor here on being a problematic area. So I think that it is essential that the international community actually builds on the wonderful work that's been going on between Ethiopia and Somalia, between the efforts of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and President Asiasi Afwerki. So we've been always engaged in Somalia, and I don't accept for somebody who just found Somalia on the map to come and criticize the UAE's role. We've been there in dark times. I spoke to an ambassador, one of our ambassadors in Somalia, who was lifted out in 92, 93. We came back. We opened an embassy that was not even in the airport. It was actually in Mogadishu and looks like a barracks. We have been committed. And the point is we feel that for all the good work, we've been wrong. And I think for us to require that sort of apology is rightful. And I think this will actually clear the way for more engagement that will help the Somali.
Just trying to get a sense of how many questions. Gentleman there in the check shirt. Yes, you'll just wait for the microphone. Name and organisation, please.
Dominic Dudley, a freelance journalist. What future, or if any, do you see for the Gulf Cooperation Council in the wake of the Qatar crisis, and not just that, but also things like Saudi Arabia and UAE's coordination committee that was launched not long ago, and a similar Saudi and Kuwaiti bilateral arrangements. Do you think the region's moving towards bilateralism and away from?
No, I don't think so. I think first of all, I'm quite optimistic about the GCC. And I'll tell you why. I think the GCC's main success over 30 years has not been political harmonization, to be honest. The GCC's main success has been creating a common market. So the benefits of this common market in terms of flow of trade, goods, people, has actually helped everybody. And I think this is basically the linchpin why the GCC will continue, and beyond the Qatar crisis and beyond when the Qatari leadership will realize what they should do. So if you really look at what the GCC has achieved, at the bottom is really what I would call security, political achievements. Above that is really the substantial thing of people owning, people moving, people buying, trade moving, companies, etc. So I feel personally that many of these economic and personal achievements of the UAE, personal in a sense that affects people's ability, etc. These are really the mainstay of the GCC, and I think for that reason, I am very optimistic that the GCC will actually recover. Because really political achievements have not been the GCC's forte in a sense. I mean, there has been some, but I'm talking in general. The bilateral track, the Saudis have just signed also the same sort of agreement with the Kuwaitis. And I see the bilateral track as supporting the multilateral track. I don't really see a contradiction here. I have to come and say that, this is the most serious crisis that the GCC has gone through. I mean, I'm not going to come and sort of marginalize it. But my belief is that because of the the reasons I mentioned, I mean, if you really look at the size of investment and trade prior to the GCC, the sizes of people owning businesses and homes, etc., outside of their country of origin, you will realize that that's really the rock solid part of the GCC, and I think this is what's going to pull it through.
Lady there in the aisle. name an organisation.
Mina Habello, I'm from Al Jazeera Arabic. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask, you've spoken about how you want to create a model of, you spread the Emirati model in the region, and you want to expand the cycle of prosperity and peace around the region. Do you think that the siege on Qatar is helping, and is the war on Yemen as well? Is it helping you in fact to spread this cycle that you're spoken about? And if I can get a comment from you about your opinion about the ICG's decision on Monday on the Qatari claim.
Yeah, I think if you think about it, the measures we took about with Qatar did not spring out as a surprise. We had reached an agreement with Qatar in 2014. The agreement was signed by the Emir of Qatar. So, expect that the country will honor something that the Emir signed it. And clearly, Qatar did not stick to its word. So clearly, there were wins before we saw this latest storm. I don't think that we want to continue this crisis forever, but I think what we do need is for Qatar to address fundamentally these two issues. Fundamentally, its support for extremism, for jihadism, for some of the terrorist organizations. It's totally irresponsible, for example, to accept the $1 billion amounts that were paid to organizations that were known to be, terrorist organizations. The other thing, of course, is we don't really see an interest for a country in our region spending millions of dollars in trying to undermine its neighbors, trying to undermine Egypt, etc. So clearly, we made it clear. I mean, I don't really see it anymore as the Qatar crisis. I see that if this is not resolved, this is a new state of affairs, where you realize where this party is, and they need to continue with their life and so on and so forth. The other part of the issue is Yemen. Again, Yemen was a tough one. I mean, we either had to accept that we will succumb to the Houthi control of Yemen, and will accept that within 10 years, 15 years, we will really have Hezbollah South with all its organizational capability, fighting prowess, political influence, or we had to address that. And I think this is, Yemen has had many problems and issues along the years. And the difference here is the Iranian element. I mean, Yemen never really had an Iranian element in any of the crises that it has seen in 1991, it has seen prior in the 60s, or in the various areas. So clearly, we're not happy to be fighting in Yemen, but we, as I said, in this different international system, it's no longer write a check and somebody is going to come and secure the stability in the region. You have to do some of the burden sharing. On the ICJ ruling, I mean, this might be a detailed issue. We're not surprised about it, because the ICJ basically stressed issues that we've already addressed. These issues are to do with families that are Emirati and Qatari, for their ability to meet and visit and so on and so forth. And the other thing, of course, is the students continuing their education and the ability to resort to the judicial system. For us, we're already doing this. And for us, we have shown the ICJ also that, we have a helpline, that we had 8,000 calls from Qataris. We had 2,000 Qataris visit the UAE last year through special process. We had trade licenses that were renewed. We had new trade licenses that were issued. So again, really, what I urge everybody to do on the Qatar issue is take out all the ugly and what I would call media halo around it, and go fundamentally to the two things. Is the Qatari regime going to stop supporting extremism and terrorism? And is the Qatari government, will the Qatari government stop interfering in trying to undermine countries like my country in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Bahrain? I think fundamentally that's what it is. Yes.
Right, for just one, take the last question as two questions in one.
Yes, sir.
That's good, just because time is limited. Just trying to get a sense of who's wants to ask it. Gentleman there, and then gentleman next to him. Name and organisation, please.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one, what's your comment on the attack on the probe carriers in the Red Sea, and which led to shipments suspended, which led to oil prices going up? Is this a threat to the Emirati oil shipments as well? And my other question is a historical peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia, which the Emirati played a big role. How did that happen?
Okay.
And then just one more other gentleman. So we have.
Nicky Dunn from Hayward Hill. Sir, thank you very much for this very stimulating discussion. Just wanted your opinion on changes in Saudi Arabia, and to what extent do you think that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has been influenced by not just the success of the UAE, but direct personal experience of life in the UAE?
Thank you. I think the first question is about the targeting of shipping in the Red Sea. I think this is another example of why the Houthi takeover of the Yemeni government in Sana'a should end. I mean, this is a totally irresponsible act. The effects of it actually, is much wider than the region. And I think it gives me a little opportunity to speak about what we're seeing around Hodeidah and around Yemen. Now, our strategic goal in capturing Hodeidah is to shorten the war in Yemen. We believe that if the Houthis have control over Hodeidah and the calculus on the ground doesn't change, the war in Yemen will continue in its sort of, same rhythm. And we need to break that. We want this war to be shorter. We believe that if the Houthis are denied Hodeidah, the war in Yemen will be shorter because that will actually change their strategic outlook. They will realize that without a port, without control over the revenue of the port and sea opening, they have to come to the negotiating table, and they have to also understand that their sort of exaggerated claims are not going to be entertained within that negotiating table. So clearly that is our purpose. As we move to Hodeidah, I have to say that we moved a year after trying to get the Houthis out through negotiations. There was a British proposal to neutralize Hodeidah, and the idea was let Hodeidah be a commercial and be a humanitarian port, but make sure that the income goes to the central bank, make sure that there's no arms that are smuggled there. And we all agreed to that British plan. It took a year, but nothing really materialized because the Houthis are masters of buying time. As a result, we pushed north on the coast, we pushed on the western coast north, and we reached Hodeidah. We realized from day one that our big challenge is not a military challenge. Our biggest challenge is how do we actually ensure that we deny the Houthis Hodeidah, but while not undermining a very brutal humanitarian situation. And the port is very dependent on it. And the second thing is how do we actually ensure that a city of 600,000, we don't get bogged down in street-to-street fighting. And these are, any military man will tell you, these are real, difficult choices. So clearly, what we have done is we have stayed out on the perimeter, pushed very hard, and are enabling Martin Griffith, who is the UN envoy. He's gone, brought the first deal. The second deal was better than this first deal because of this combination. We hope the third deal also will be better. But there is also an end to the patience, because you can't drive 200 kilometers up the coast and then come and say, no, let's pull back. So the only way forward is, the only way is actually forward, is to get data. And what we are trying to do is give diplomacy every possible chance to secure that. So I think that is necessary. But again, coming back to your issue, this is another proof why you can't come and accept that a militia that actually holds, the same, death to America placard every day is trusted with running a country, and we're expected also to keep regional security while accepting this sort of, threat right next to us. So I think that's the first thing. With regards to Ethiopia and Eritrea, I think this is a historical breakthrough. I mean, the two countries, have a lot of commonality, historical and ethnic and economic and so on and so forth. Somehow, because again of the War of Independence and later on the border war, these links broke down in 1993. And it's been problematic for both countries, both economies. I mean, Ethiopia to us is one of the most important African countries. It's not only 100 million people, but it's 100 million people in the Horn of Africa, which has an impact on Middle Eastern security. So clearly, as we move that way, we've built a very good rapport with the Eritrean president. And that has been built because of the Yemen campaign. And we noticed through that the time was ripe. It's not like, I don't want to exaggerate the UAE's role. The UAE's role is a facilitator and should not be exaggerated. But I think it was important that you saw the two parties come close at a certain moment, and you needed somebody to sort of bring them closer. And I think we're very proud to have played that role. But I think they both see that this is essential for greater prosperity and stability for the whole region. And this is something that is in our interest. And with regards to Saudi Arabia, I feel that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has the aspirations of his generation. His age and a very young Saudi Arabia sort of clicked. He's got huge support among the large demographics of Saudi Arabia of what he is trying to do. And really he's unlocking the potential of Saudi Arabia in many ways. It's not going to be easy because any restructure, any change is never easy. But I think it is important that this is taking place. And as I said, from our perspective, I might do something in the UAE, but what I do in the UAE is relevant to my country because I am a mid-sized country. But with Saudi Arabia, it's a large Arab country and it has this sort of Islamic relevance that very few countries have. So if you have that sort of forward-thinking, forward-looking, policy, this will reverberate. And I think this is what is exciting us. What is exciting us, not only what is happening to Saudi Arabia per se, but for us to be able to come and say there is now a big, huge model moving forward. And I think this model comes at a time where we are trying to break a stalemated view that was enforced by political Islamists over the last 2 decades of looking at our world through the prism of a sect or the prism of a religion and this. And we need to break that. And I think what's happening in Saudi Arabia is very essential. And what I'm really urging here is for people here to really look at Saudi Arabia with fresh eyes. Because I know over the years there has been, a compilation of stereotyping on Saudi Arabia. So clearly I think, Prince Mohammed bin Salman is a very intelligent man. I've met him, very impressed by him, very impressed by his energy. And I've met him before he became Crown Prince also. And I think at the same time, he's well-traveled, he's well-read, and it's well known that his father, who he's always been close to, is one of the best read of any of the Saudi princes and kings. So I think, again, I'm plugging in, the whole reading thing for you, Nika. But I think that this is the important thing. I think he has really come at a moment where he's captured the aspiration of changing demographics in his country. He realizes that, that he has the tool for the future. And, we wish him well. And I think that people really need to look at it, because really the implications of this are phenomenal, and I think they are going to be very positive for the region. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a great tribute to our guest speaker today. We've got this size of crowd. I think a record number of cameras here also, not just for midsummer. We like to end on time. Here, unlike the Geneva negotiations with the DMV and peace talks in 1954, we don't stop the clocks, but I'm sure our guest will be back. And apologies for anyone who didn't have a chance to ask questions, but please send them in if you have anything. Of course, we'll pass them on. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a couple of questions.